Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve McDonald, the Consulting Program Director for the Africa Program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm here on behalf of Howard Wolpe. Dr. Wolpe is not with us this morning. Most of you know he's had a recent operation, and he's still in the process of recovering from a hip replacement. So he's back in Washington now, but not as mobile as he would like to be. So he's not with us this morning and regrets it to the Foreign Minister. But I want to welcome you. You know, the Woodrow Wilson Center is the living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson, who, as an academic and President of the United States and President of Princeton University, very much cared about bringing the worlds of ideas and policy together. And so this is very much in keeping with the tradition of the Woodrow Wilson Center, where we bring a prominent African to speak to us about his country and progress on the continent. Foreign Minister will be speaking to us today, but I'm going to introduce Peter Lewis, who you all know, I imagine, who is going to introduce the Foreign Minister, who is an old friend of his. Peter, of course, is the Associate Professor and Director of African Studies at Johns Hopkins University, an old friend of our program, and often serves as a moderator and a presenter for us. So with no further ado, let me turn it over to Peter.
Thank you. Maybe I'll use the podium. You'll speak at the podium, and we'll do Q&A. You'll speak at the podium,
Yes.
and then we'll do Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll speak from the podium and then do Q&A here. Well, as I look at the biographies, the minister gets 6 lines, and I get 26 lines. I don't know how that happened, but you can edit for our relative standing and importance. I have indeed been privileged to be a friend of Minister Ojo Madwekwe for a good number of years. I met him very early on when I was a beginning graduate student, newly acquainted and newly entering into Nigeria. And he was a host, a guide, and a friend, and we've spent many, many evenings talking long into the night about the Nigerian condition and the various dimensions of Nigeria's challenges, resolutions to those challenges, the way forward. I know him to be a deeply thoughtful, widely read, and highly articulate and incisive analyst of Nigeria, both in terms of its own domestic dynamics and Nigeria seen comparatively and historically, and placing Nigeria in global affairs. And so it is fitting that somebody with these intellectual gifts and this perspective and experience should find himself as Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Ojo Madwekwe began his career in the law. It is not generally known, but he also won 2 elections in 1983 and 1989, but such is the nature of Nigerian politics that he never served in the National Assembly despite winning the elections because of military intervention on those occasions. He's also served as secretary to the ruling People's Democratic Party. In addition, he's held positions in, I believe, 3 cabinets. Is that correct? Yeah, 3 separate cabinets in the last 3 administrations: Minister of Culture, Minister of Transport, and currently Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he speaks to us at a very propitious moment. It's an important moment for Nigeria and, of course, an important moment for the United States and for U.S.-Nigerian relations. Not only do we have a new administration in Washington, but we were just recently informed that the administration has nominated Johnny Carson to be Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, so we're now much clearer on the leadership of the Africa Bureau and the leadership on African affairs at state. Of course, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is no stranger to Africa, so there was a basis for the minister to have good and deep conversations with Secretary of State Clinton on, was it Monday, I believe. And, of course, there are a number of pressing and important issues in terms of Nigerian and U.S. relations that remain to be addressed and we need to pay attention to going forward. Nigeria has had a major role in peacekeeping and conflict management, mediation, and other elements of conflict management on the African continent, and certainly has played an important role peacekeeping in West Africa, in Darfur, and potentially in other areas as well. As a major oil producer and oil exporter, Nigerian decisions and Nigerian actions loom large in global oil markets, and the concerns about instability in the Niger Delta and their international and regional reverberations are, of course, a basis for common discussion and dialogue. In our current global economic downturn, Nigeria, which has been a quite well-managed economy over the last several years, will face challenges along with every other country in the world and every other country in Africa. The oil price is now down around $40 from its peak at $147 last July. So there are revenue pressures. External reserves, while still quite strong and robust, are down considerably. Nigeria is going to face fiscal pressure, and of course that may lead to a role for international dialogue about cooperation and assistance in terms of managing this economic storm and riding it out. In addition, there are other important issues that you're probably quite well aware of, particularly in Washington, D.C., as we would be if we were having this discussion in Houston. There are at least 1 million Nigerians living in the United States, and we encounter them in all walks of life, in the medical professions, in academia, in journalism, in finance, in engineering, and so forth. And they obviously are a lively, vibrant, and prominent community in the United States. And so there are those issues as well. And so at this moment, when a new U.S. administration and a settled in but still fairly new Nigerian administration are talking about the issues for the continent and the issues in our bilateral relationship, which many of us hope will be accentuated going forward, this is especially good time to talk to and hear from Foreign Minister Ojo Maduekwe from Nigeria, and we'll have time for questions and answers later. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my good friend and brother, Professor Peter Lewis, who, as always, is quite generous with his comments about me, except that he left out what I think is the most important item in describing me, and that is that I have been a very enthusiastic student of his over the years. I hope any reservation in mentioning that wasn't just out of his characteristic modesty. I hope it had nothing to do with his own assessment as a professor as to how well a student I have been. But it's been my privilege to know Peter for a long time, and I'm honored to be here, and of course to meet all you distinguished leaders and scholars here. I want to acknowledge, of course, in a special way, the director of the center, I believe that's their title, director of the center.
No. Consulting director for the program.
Okay,
for the
fine.
Africa program.
Right.
That's okay.
Thank you very much. And all of you are duly acknowledged. And for me, it's a great honor, indeed a privilege to be here. I had long looked forward to this prestigious platform to share some of my thoughts on thoughts of my country with you. And I want to thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. And let me quickly just start by saying that in the memorable words of President Barack Obama during his inaugural address, which I was in Washington to witness, President Obama said, and I quote, "We remain a young nation, but in the words of Scripture, the time has come to set aside childish things." Well, ladies and gentlemen, just a little over 2 months after those unforgettable words were mentioned, and in the first few days of a beautiful spring in Washington, and a couple of more days before Easter, I've come back to Washington to claim that pledge made by President Obama in terms of its implications for Nigeria-U.S. relations. I've come to say that in the growing partnership between these two transatlantic friends, let us set aside childish things. And I'll quickly proceed in the course of my remarks to mention what those childish things are. For now, let me emphasize that this partnership should mature on the strength of both parties. Let us, Nigeria and United States, turn a page on our weaknesses that have been manifest in this old and very promising relationship. A relationship that, of course, was celebrated when Nigeria was, the sponsorship for Nigeria membership of the United Nations was done by no less a person than the U.S. Secretary of State at the time, Mr. Christian Hatter, and that meant a lot to us. It's time for us to choose again, in the words of President Obama, our better history. And there's a lot of evidence of that better history. Let us bring greater imagination, vision, courage, and commitment to the endless possibilities in the relations between Nigeria's Africa's largest democracy and America, which is the world's oldest and most powerful democracy. And there could be no better place to make this kind of appeal than at a center that is dedicated to the visions and ideals of President Woodrow Wilson. And I think in considering which direction should be Nigeria-U.S. relations, we should spare some moments to say or imagine what will Woodrow Wilson be saying now from where he is. What will he be saying to the prospects of such a relationship? Of course, Nigeria was not yet a country in terms of nationhood when President Woodrow Wilson blazed this trail and inspired so many things that have made the world a safer and a more secure place. Not as safe and secure as he would like it to be, but this is a man who did not yield to instincts to be insular or instincts to look at America's role in a limited manner. But very rare for a politician, had a grand vision about what America can do far beyond its borders. And it is indeed a most propitious time to reflect on the wider implications of globalism, of multilateralism, and indeed strategic partnership like that of Nigeria, United States, in a place like Woodrow Wilson Center. Yes, even as President Obama implied or said, actually did say, not just implied, he said you're a young nation. You may be a young nation after 200 years, but we are even younger than you are after 40 years. You should take us along as between siblings, some older, one older and the other, and because you are older, a bit more protective. That's the nature of sibling relationship. And the younger one is usually a little more mischievous and more full of pranks. Now, but without pushing the metaphor too far, let me say up front that the simple message I bring to Washington is that a strong Nigeria is critical to a strong Africa. And such a strong Africa is in turn crucial for not only peace and security for a continent that is currently the most violent, but also a continent which, if the problems of development are not confronted in that continent, could sadly become a heaven for terrorists and drug cartels and other dangerous non-state actors who can be no friends of either Africa or America. And without stretching again your imagination too far, within the context of President Obama's reference, he was speaking to not just an American audience, indeed, for an inauguration that was watched by billions of people all over the world. And the interest his election generated all over the world, you would think he was running to be president of the world. Whatever he was saying here must be seen as not just meant for American audience. So if you may permit me to again go back to this statement about let's put aside childish things. And my instincts as a preacher's kid, of course, will not allow me skip over the context in which he, or the source from where he mentioned that. And that's so, of course, I said he was quite clear that he took it from the scriptures. And the full sentence from where President Obama lifted that phrase actually reads that when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And that's what President Obama was urging the audience that watched his inaugural speech. We put away childish things. But then the last sentence in that hymn of love, which St. Paul wrote, concludes by saying, and now abide faith, hope, love. These three, but the greatest of these is love. I think it's quite interesting that the president of the most powerful country in the world will be marking his inaugural speech with phrases from the most celebrated poem dealing with love, dealing with solidarity in the annals of religious history. And for those who may be more familiar with a more muscular way of discussing, and you don't know what the most powerful man in the world, what business he has, speaking in the context of love, in the context of hope and all that. I believe that in these days of smart power and smart diplomacy, and the fact that even the most powerful country in the world is being bogged down in Iraq with great sacrifices, and your unhappy experiences in Vietnam and other places begins to say so much in what is in favor for the other leg of your national security doctrine, which you know as well as anyone else, that those pillars are defense, diplomacy, and development. That perhaps there's need to look at one of those pillars more closely as being more effective, the issue of development. And either you look at it from the secular context, or you try to be biblical as President Obama tried to be, making reference to putting away childish things in the context of a hymn of love. The world can be a safer place if the emphasis is on development and fighting poverty and treating each other as much as possible in the language of partnership rather than the language of paternalism. And I believe that the new administration in the United States has the capacity to engage on those terms. And we are ready. We are ready to work with the new administration to ensure that those who wish to take the world back into a situation of anarchy and terror and violence will not succeed. And to enable us to move in that direction and ensure that the environment for peace is stronger, and that whether it's from Atlanta to Abuja, or from London to Lahore, or from Kansas to Kenya, that we see the world truly as one global village, where the camps, the walls of misery will not can never be high enough to affect those who are in the compounds of prosperity. And so I bring to you this morning a message about a new Africa already indicated in the direction of this new administration. And that new Africa is the type that we've been pushing for the Nigerian end. I've come to talk to you about an Africa that must be seen as more than just hungry mouths waiting to be fed. It's about an Africa also with stretched out hands, ready to work. I've come to talk to you about an Africa with brains that are adding value to the global economy through what the diaspora, African diaspora, are doing, both in the United States, in Western Europe, and everywhere. Nigerians, and indeed other Africans, are adding value to the global economy, not only in terms of excellence in such very rare disciplines like neurosurgery and space science, but also they are being, in many places, very committed social workers, community leaders, who are great models of what it means to be a global citizen. That is the kind of Africa we want satellite television to show more often than the Africa of empty stomachs waiting to be fed, Africa of charity, Africa of aid, as distinct from Africa of trade. We want the new Africa to be seen in terms of Africa that has voices, voices that have enriched and continue to give meaning, context, and relevance to the global multicultural discourse through the vitality of his prose and poetry, paintings, and even fabrics, and dance. I'm talking about an Africa that is eager to distinguish, Africa that has eyes, to distinguish between its true friends and likely new predators. We have strange new friends who are claiming that they can do more for Africa than whatever has been done for Africa before. And we know that their main interest is in terms of ensuring that Africa remains a continent of primary producers and exporters of raw materials, and not Africa that can truly create wealth and be part of the global economy. We have eyes to see, and we can make those distinctions. In other words, the international image of Africa in a disembodied manner is neither helpful for Africa nor for the rest of the world. Africa is more than empty stomach or empty mouths to be fed. Africa also have eyes and brains and have ears and have hands to work. There is need for a paradigm shift. And I think that paradigm shift is going to bring about a more meaningful discussion, a discussion in which the childish things are put away. But even I've still discussed that Africa, an Africa that is very large, one of the largest continents, perhaps the largest. There are many gateways to that Africa, of course. But one thing is clear, and without being modest about it, that Nigeria, by its location, size, markets, resource endowments, and the vitality of its institutions, even at the nascent stage of those institutions, and the vitality of its peoples, in spite of their many faults, remain the ultimate destination. Nigeria's destiny in Africa has been defined by its demography. And right from the beginning of our nationhood, our foreign policy has been shaped by the notion that Nigeria cannot be safe and secure if the rest of the continent are neither safe nor secure. Nigeria cannot prosper if the rest of the continent are not prospering. So our foreign policy has been based on an enlightened self-interest that moved us to intervene in Congo barely a few years after our independence, and moved us to save Sierra Leone and Liberia from collapsing as states. And we paid a heavy price for that, both in monetary terms and in human lives. Something close to $13 billion was spent on those peacekeeping operations. And that was by an African country. We didn't go there based on any invitation by United Nations or any other global player. We went there because we felt we couldn't fold our arms and allow Sierra Leone and Liberia to go under. And we have continued to extend hands of support and fellowship, partnership to them as they reconstruct their economies. Right now we're in Darfur. We're the largest peacekeeping country in Darfur. We paid quite some price for that. Almost 50 Nigerian soldiers have lost their lives in the course of serving in Darfur. And we are aware about interests that have been expressed. Secretary Hillary Clinton did mention that when I met with her about Somalia. The point I'm making here is clear and simple, and that a country in which every fifth African happens to be a Nigerian has no choice not to be the policeman of Africa, definitely not, but sees Africa's future and welfare as closely intertwined with it. And so when state capacity in Nigeria is addressed by the most powerful economy like the United States, you are, without saying so in so many words, strengthening Nigeria to continue to do what it has already chosen to do anyway, which is to make Africa strong and safe. And that's the point I was making when I said a strong Nigeria is critical for a strong Africa, and a strong Africa is very germane to international peace and prosperity. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you think I came to Washington to lament, forget it. I came here to urge action in leveraging on our mutual strengths. Indeed, I came here to celebrate those strengths. The continent of President Obama's father is poised to move away from a yes we cry mode to a yes we can profile. So, what can you folks do to encourage that more robust Africa, or more robust Nigeria? And if sometimes I use Nigeria and Africa in synonymous terms, it's not due to any kind of imperial hauteur in which we see Africa as Nigeria writ large. It's just simply because it's difficult to think Nigerian without thinking African. And our brothers and sisters on the continent always urge us to think along those lines. For you to encourage us to continue to do what we had long chosen to be doing as a nation, as a country in Africa, there are a number of things which you would like to look at. One is to recognize our achievements. You know, the whole psychological concept of positive reinforcement do not only apply to children who are growing up and need to develop considerable self-esteem to be responsible and effective adults. It also applies to new nations, to fragile democracies, to fragile markets, to systems that are still battling with fighting corruption, away from the primordial, prebendal way of looking at power as a basis for primitive accumulation, to nations whose boundaries were determined by colonial experience. And so nation building and national integration remains a challenge. There's need to engage in positive reinforcement to encourage those nations to know that the future indeed is promising, and that even in the fumbling steps, that they can really not only walk, then indeed they can run. And that's what siblings are supposed to do for each other. And I know that Nigeria and America are siblings. I repeat, you say you are 200 years young. That's what President Obama said. Well, we are 40 years young. And why can't we, as two young people, hold hands and support each other and move on in a very encouraging and not demeaning manner? So there's need to recognize our achievements. Those achievements in the case of Nigeria, in spite of the challenges and difficulties, include a little celebrated success story, which in Nigeria, because of the hurdles we had to go through, mean a lot to us. And that success story, in spite of its imperfections, was to achieve a democratic transition from one elected civilian government to another, a transition that involved change of personalities. When you look at the fact that this had never happened before, you will be able to appreciate where we are coming from. You can then put in context some of our foibles and difficulties, whether in not having an electoral process that you will judge to be as transparent as your own, in spite of Florida, and in spite of the trauma of Chicago politics over the years, trauma that even still resonates, as happened recently when there was an attempt to sell the seat of President Obama for Senate. And one is not doing this to be just mischievous, as younger brothers tend to be. It's to say that, look, in this matter, we are fellow travelers, really. I know there was a time the word fellow traveler had its own other dimension, but I'm using it positively. We are fellow travelers. We are fellow pilgrims. Some pilgrims are ahead of the others in the journey, but none has eventually arrived. And therefore, a little humility on matters of this nature are not only necessary in this journey, but it will help solidarity, and it will also ensure that we don't engage in a dialogue of the deaf. And it's our position that too often the way America engages Africa does not quite rise beyond becoming a dialogue of the deaf. And we think that there's need to celebrate those things Africa has done well, look at internal strengths in Africa, and the fact that there's ownership. There's ownership for those things that we're expected to do, whether in the area of human rights or rule of law, or fighting corruption. We're not doing them because Washington is asking us to do them. We're doing them because we need to do those things, not only to survive as new nations, but also to lift our people away from poverty. Is that kind of language we want to hear? And that language is possible if the achievements in Africa, indeed the achievements in Nigeria, are recognized more often than have taken place. There is also need to recognize achievement in the area of national consensus on the fight against corruption. That consensus has been reached because we see it as critical to our national survival. How can a country of 140 million people, 200 ethnic nationalities, that because of an unfortunate shift in its economic base, from the days when our universities were built with revenue from agriculture, like cash crops like granules and palm oil and cocoa and so on and so forth, Those great universities were built from those resources. The 4-year civil war was fought without borrowing money from abroad. It was not fought with oil money because there was no oil money at that time. Most of the big foundational things that made Nigeria in the 60s have a GDP that was higher than South Korea and Malaysia were achieved without oil money. And now, just at the time we needed the discipline acquired from the Civil War, the capacity to use, as those of us who were on the other side, who were on the eastern side, the side that was regarded as Biafra, as regrettable as that Civil War was, but there were flashpoints of possibilities of what an African society can achieve, because the technology that was used to holding at bay the might of federal forces for 4 years were homegrown technology. We made our own tanks, those on the other side of the conflict, on the Biafran side. We manufactured our own tanks. Those tanks are still there in the National War Museum in Umuahia, which is now a federal thing. We had our own, we adjusted our own aircraft. They could fly below the radar in a way that the Nigerian troops found it difficult to be able to. So there was so much ingenuity that was shown on both sides of the conflict, both on the side of federal troops and on the side of the rebel Biafran group. But unfortunately for Nigeria, when the war ended, rather than translating those skills, since we were now one country and there was reconciliation, the faster reconciliation in any country that fought a civil war. That's again another success story which the world has not taken adequate note of, particularly in these days of conflict resolution. How did federal Nigeria and Biafra handle the reconciliation without any outside intervention in such a way that young men like me, who were just a few weeks before the end of the war, we were in the bush carrying arms. 2 weeks after, we were in Lagos in come back, welcome home disco parties to celebrate our return. And we had support from friends to go back to university. Igbos and those in the rebel part of the country who left northern Nigeria and had their properties in Kanu and Kaduna, when they went back to the cities in the north, they had the money, the rent that was accumulated for them in their absence, given back to them by their northern neighbors. Nobody took away their properties in the north. We didn't need an outside group to help us to do that. And within less than 10 years after the end of that civil war, someone in rebel Biafra, and indeed who was very prominent in the war effort as Biafra tried to succeed, somebody who was very prominent, one of the brightest citizens we had during the war effort on the Biafran side, became the vice president of Nigeria. And indeed, but for military intervention, was poised to be the president of Nigeria when they came back for the second term as vice president to Shagari. These were important achievements. But as I said before, unfortunately, we couldn't build on these achievements because the oil came. And when oil came, granules and cocoa and palm oil went into disuse. Of course, easy oil money led to corruption and the collapse of the moral infrastructure in many ways. Now, but there's a consensus that since this oil is going to finish someday, if our development is based on oil, then it's too risky for us to allow that to continue. And so, first is to end the corruption that has taken away so much resources that ought to be used in building the infrastructure that can sustain the nation. And then the other one is to, of course, diversify our economy. So, I said this, I spent quite some time on this issue of fighting corruption for you to know that we need no lectures here. What we need are discussions, adult discussions with us to enable us engage on fast-tracking institutional building. And so when we are told who should head the anti-corruption agency and who shouldn't head it. We resent that. We think that it confuses the message with the messenger. We believe that it's a distraction from the excellent work that has already been done in Nigeria in fighting corruption. And it again feeds back into that stereotype of Nigeria as a corrupt nation, as a country that cannot get its act together. And it's only natural that people who don't have appetite for those kind of difficult conversations may have to shut down and leave the rest of the discussion to diplomats like me, which, of course, it's not sufficient. It's not enough. We are talking of national consensus, of course, in a 7-point agenda, which is quite comprehensive, an agenda of this administration for national development, which is a clear roadmap to actualizing Goldman Sachs' prediction that Nigeria could be one of 20 leading economies in the year 2020. Nigeria could be one of the 20 leading economies in the world in the year 2020. We take this Goldman Sachs prediction, or if you want to be maybe religious-minded, call it prophecy. We take it sufficiently serious enough that we have now designed our economic blueprint with the nomenclature Vision 2020, because we believe that we will be one of those 20 leading economies. And we think America can take credit by partnering with us to go in that direction because of the traditional friendly relations we've had with the United States. The resources in Nigeria to make that possible are there. Another success story, of course, is a completely firm and uncompromising commitment to rule of law. In fact, that compromising uncommitment to rule of law has again led to some kind of misconception about how serious we are in fighting corruption. And our position is, yes, the fight against corruption is important, but if you fight corruption in a corrupt manner, the outcome will be corrupt, and it will not be sustained. And so our not just carrying corrupt people and deny them the same rights that corrupt people have in America, and just lock them up without trial, or as somebody has suggested, which you think is quite ridiculous, that our laws are too easy on corrupt people. But those laws are based on the common law jurisprudence, which both United States and indeed our earlier colonial master Britain practiced. The accused is entitled to bail. In the case of Nigeria, unless it's a death penalty issue. And if the man is on bail, and you grant him visa to come to America, he will visit America even as a former corrupt, quote-unquote, corrupt governor. And then you blame it on us that the man is moving around freely. Because our jurisprudence allows for the rights of the accused. Each person is still innocent until so convicted. So we are making a firm commitment to the rule of law. But we have a challenge here to ensure that the law should not definitely be used as a shield for corrupt people. It should also be a sword of righteousness to fight corruption. What we need here is suggestion, advice, and not lectures, and not condemnation. How do we strengthen, how do we strike the balance between the law as a shield and the law as a sword? There's a firm commitment to democratic consolidation. That's the only way you can keep a country of 140 million people and 200 ethnic groups with almost equal number of adherents to two great historical religions, Islam and Christianity. It's through democracy that you can keep such a place together. And it's important what we are doing in Nigeria to ensure those two great religions live amicably. It should be of global interest, particularly in the context of interfaith dialogue and the dialogue of civilizations. It means that we can be very important interlocutors in this area, and we can offer United States that face challenges as it deals with the Muslim world. We can offer some insights that could be quite useful. The Muslims we have in Nigeria are liberal Muslims that hurt nobody, And in many families, you have almost equal number of Muslims on both sides. The former president of Nigeria, a very devout Baptist preacher, President Olusegun Obasanjo, the only sister he has is a Muslim. Even I, standing here now, my daughter-in-law, a very sweet girl whose name is Yewande, who got they got married July last year in a nice ceremony in a Presbyterian church in Dallas. But the parents who attended that wedding, both of them, both father and mother, are devout Muslims. This is the kind of interplay of faiths we have in Nigeria that obviously make Nigeria a very interesting mosaic for religious freedom and religious tolerance. This is a success story that needs to be celebrated more often than has been the case. We're also committed to electoral reforms. We have unprecedented and very progressive decisions that have come up in the ongoing electoral reform. One is, of course, something we never had before in our laws, and that is the right of independent candidates to contest any election, including even being presidential candidates. The Independent Electoral Commission has been made truly more independent than ever before by the reforms which government has agreed to. We literally accepted all the things the reform panel, consisting mainly of people who were opposed to government, or people who are not even in government, or people who you could say were even apolitical, as judges, retired judges, and so on. And we took virtually all the reforms which they suggested. Again, because we believe that electoral reforms are key to the survival of Nigeria. And the president made that commitment during his inaugural speech, again, without any pressure from anybody. The Independent National Electoral Commission now is going to have representatives from youths. They didn't have that before, from women, from labor. They will all serve in that panel and help to bring about a more transparent electoral process. Again, as tends to be the case, I believe not only in Nigeria, but even here in America, the media can just grab one issue and flog it, and that particular issue could now tend to drown either other voices or other aspects of a success story. In strict conformity with the doctrine of separation of powers, it was the view of the Federal Executive Council, that is the Council of Ministers and the President and Vice President, that the recommendation of the panel that the chairman of Electoral Commission should not be appointed by the judiciary. We felt that it's not right. Again, we have a presidential system very much modeled on the U.S. Presidential system. We felt that it would be a dangerous incursion into the executive powers of the president if the judiciary now discharge responsibilities which traditionally are that for the president. In any event, what are the fears? If the president is good enough to appoint the Chief Justice of the country, if he's good enough to appoint the judges of the Supreme Court, then why can't he be good enough to appoint the chairman of the Electoral Commission? In any event, even in the difficult days for which we get a lot of condemnation about what went wrong during the elections of last year and so on and so forth, the same judges that were appointed by the president, by President Obasanjo, they ruled against the president's party in many cases. We lost a number of states because of the ruling of those judges. So the issue of independence of the election panel has nothing to do with who appoints. It has more to do with the integrity and the character of those who are so appointed. Because the judges showed integrity and showed character. They didn't allow the what was maybe regarded by the opposition as the overbearing influence of the ruling party to make them take decisions that will enable us retain key states like Ondo State or Edo State, or indeed my own state, Abia, even Imo State. And you are looking at a situation where in these states, about 100% of members of the state assembly are all PDP members. They are PDP members. Nobody's quarreling about that. The same elections, you have the PDP members sweep through the results in the state assembly. But now for governorship, because of one or two procedural defects that took place, a little bit of overzealousness maybe on the part of some PDP officials, were now lost in court, and the place was handed over to the other party. So you have a governor ruling a state, everybody in the state assembly is in a different party, but he gets his position through the court because PDP lost in the court. So we have a strong, vibrant judiciary. So the feeling was that if we now had judges determining who will be in the electoral panel, you will now drag the judiciary, which, in fairness to the judiciary, remains the most credible and the longest surviving icon, I would say, of British, the positive side of British involvement in Nigeria. It has stood the test of time. We are not saying they're all saints. Some corruption takes place, obviously, particularly at lower echelons of the ladder. But when you move up, the higher you move up in the judiciary in Nigeria, the more you find strong examples of integrity and so on. Now, if you now drag them to a process where they get involved in appointing members of the electoral panel, you run the risk of tarnishing their image, because those who lose elections, because part of the problem we have in Nigeria is bad loser syndrome. Nobody loses the election in Nigeria and believe he has sincerely lost. Those who won will have rigged them out. All kinds of things are said. Now you bring the judiciary into it. Those who lose will now say, that judge who was on the decision-making platform to determine who became a member of the electoral commission had an interest in this party or in that candidate. And the judiciary will now be forced to defend itself. So in order to protect the judiciary from the murky waters of politics, the feeling was to leave them to continue doing what they are doing. Because at the end of the day, after the elections, we'll go back to them. Those who want to challenge the election will go back to the same judiciary for them to determine whether the elections was free and fair, as they've done in the past few months. And if they are the one who appoint the umpire, how will they be able to dispose of those cases in a manner that is credible? And so I think that commitment, again, is clear and should be understood. There's the other success story of uncompromising leadership stance against unconstitutional takeover of governments in the sub-region. And this should be of great concern to the United States. It's sad to admit that in the past few months, not even years, there have been some democratic reversals in the sub-region in which countries like Mauritania, Guinea, Conakry have succumbed to military coup d'etat. Now, Nigeria has been very firm not only in condemning these unconstitutional changes, but also has even led in asking for sanctions. I, as Foreign Minister of Nigeria, was the one that moved for sanctions against Mauritania, and it was accepted by my colleagues and also by the heads of states meeting at African Union. For us, it's almost like religion that no government that comes in to power in Africa without democratic constitutional process will be recognized. We treat them as a pariah. And we have been muscular in this matter, in that even in Sao Tome, we moved in physically. The former president risked his life to literally fly into Sao Tome at the time when the coup makers were still very much in control, and brought back the president of Sao Tome, who was overthrown by a coup d'etat in Sao Tome and was a guest of Nigeria, brought him back and told the soldiers, this is your president. He was elected by the people. And that has stood. We are looking at a situation where the standby forces, this is again where America can be useful, rather than, we are not opposed to AFRICOM in terms of the content of AFRICOM, but we know that even here in America, AFRICOM suffers some conceptual clarity problems. So we are thinking that the important issue is not what you call it, AFRICOM or whatever. The important thing is the content, the long-standing collaboration between African militaries, definitely Nigerian military and United States military, in terms of capacity building, training, and so forth and so forth. It's important. It's important not only for America, it's important for Nigeria, because for us to be able to ensure that our REIT all over our territory is effective. We need to be able to deal with challenges to the authority of the state. And in the area of the democratic challenges we are facing, if the standby forces, like have 6 standby forces in Africa, and we've been saying United States can support those standby forces. If those standby forces, the deterrent value that they can enjoy if they are well equipped. If, for instance, African Union now, take example of what's happening in Madagascar, some other rascalities that are just taking place. A young man who is 34, who by the constitution is not even qualified to contest election as president, has simply by organizing a number of demonstrations on the street, sent a duly elected president packing. Again, African Union has piously, including Nigeria, condemned this. But beyond condemnation, if the guys stay put, as they have stayed put in Mauritania, they have stayed put in, well, we hope they won't stay put in Guinea-Conakry, because we're giving them up till December to conduct the election and get out of town. But you all know very well that when you make declarations as a government or indeed as an international body, and you don't have the might, the military might, to back that declaration, it could be trivialized. So if we have support for standby forces, I could contemplate a situation where governments that that are overthrown by soldiers could be asked to just pack within hours and move. Otherwise, the standby forces will move into the capital to restore constitutional order. Nigeria has been very, very strong in this area, and we think that there's need for better understanding here. In the case of Guinea-Bissau, where the president was assassinated and the chief of defense staff also assassinated, I was there twice within a week. Again, Nigeria showed great leadership, not just because we are the chairman of ECOWAS, but because we had long shown an interest in making sure that emerging narco state called Guinea-Bissau, which in many ways, if one is looking for a graphic example of what a failed state is, all you need to do is go to Guinea-Bissau. We have been very strong in making sure that they don't completely go down into the abyss. And so right now we're supporting them to have elections within the time stipulated in the Constitution. We are aware that drug cartels are using Guinea-Bissau as a transshipment area, drug cartels from Latin America. Of course, they know most of the potential consumers are not there in West Africa, although we have growing concerns about our citizens going to that consumption. The target is Europe, and from Europe back to United States. So the U.S. should be interested in what Nigeria is able to do to prevent Guinea-Bissau from completely collapsing and becoming a heaven for drug cartels. It all comes back to what I said about a strong Nigeria is critical for a strong Africa, and it's in your own interest. I've mentioned our muscular profile in peacekeeping in Darfur, following on a long tradition distinguished by our roles in Congo in the 60s and 7 West African states of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Conakry. We maintain this posture in spite of the vagaries in our revenue base arising from the global economic crisis. We have remained rare examples of good neighborliness and conflict resolution, as evidenced in the way we subject ourselves to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice over the issue of Bakassi. Many other countries, including countries in more developed, advanced parts of the world, may have felt inclined to go to war with their neighbor over Bakassi. We didn't do so. We have remained very active, responsive, and responsible players in the various international fora we are members of, whether ECOWAS or AU or Commonwealth. Yet I'll be honest to admit that we face serious challenges which good friends can best partner with us to solve, rather than demoralize us with uninformed criticisms. These include the Niger Delta challenge, the wastage of our resources through gas flaring, and here again the concept of clean technology, which clean technology, which you have the capacity to work with us on, should be of interest to you, because the amount of gas that is fled in Nigeria is enough to power 20 cities of the size of Washington. Now, apart from the environmental pollution it's causing, is the issue of poverty it creates also. we are also faced with the linkage, the obvious linkage, possibly. I'm told I'm running out of time. The obvious linkages between any hemorrhaging that may be taking place in terms of state capacity and continue to sustain our laudable record in peacekeeping. I just want to leave you with two thoughts, which you may not find very pleasant. One is that if the bad guys in Afghanistan, as you flush them out from Afghanistan, if they decide to regroup in Somalia, what do you think should be the role of other your African allies? And you should begin to worry about that in the context of whatever strength you give to countries like Nigeria has implications in terms of your own safety. Then the last point I want to make is the democratic reversals I just mentioned, which is occurring at a time when the theology of market economy is in retreat. And even here, you are already nationalizing, or you are being asked to nationalize a number of institutions. I don't know the future of AIG now, but at least in Western Europe, there is a move now to review the orthodoxy of the market philosophy and so on. And this is happening at a time when the Washington Consensus had virtually succeeded with great difficulty in Africa in getting us to that orthodoxy. Privatization and so on, we were already making progress there. Now, the collapse of the markets, not just worldwide, but as it's going to happen also in Africa, and the collapse of fragile democracies, might we see a certain kind of link there? Because could it be some sort of temptation for the Praetorian Guards to now feel that past efforts at privatization were not things that should have been done, where as a result, we don't share that view, but as a result of dictation from Washington and elsewhere, and therefore the kind of protectionism which again is being talked about in the United States, in Western Europe, could have its own African variant in which non-democratic forces may feel that they are the best equipped to save, quote unquote, our economy at a time of collapsing markets and scarcity. Because they'll be doing it for themselves. But I think that the duality of market and democracy, which America has pushed for so long, might be under enormous stress now at a time of global economic crisis. And so again, it comes back to state capacity, it comes back to synergy, it comes back to what you can do to make sure market economies like Nigeria remain strong, and democracies like Nigeria can move away from being a fragile democracy to become a strong democracy, so that the global economic meltdown will not be the excuse for a reversal for the democratic success story that Africa has taken. Once more, I want to thank you for your time, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for a very comprehensive presentation. We have just less than 15 minutes for questions and answers. Ministers graciously agreed to take some. Let's please identify ourselves. You will be handed a microphone when you ask your question. Make your interventions very short and questions, because we don't have a lot of time. We'll take 2 or 3 at a time so the minister can handle them all at once. Start right over here.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. My name is Roman Shpak from National Democratic Institute. I have two brief questions. One on the issue of electoral reform, about which you spoke. What is now that the white paper has passed both the Federal Executive Council and the State Council, what is your government doing to ensure that credible electoral reform will not only pass the National Assembly but also gets implemented? Related to that, has your government formulated a position on the future tenure of Chairman Iwu? And I know that his tenure is scheduled to expire sometime in 2010. He already spoke about beginning implementation plans and planning for the 2011 election. What is your government's position on his continuation in office? Second question, quickly, on anti-corruption battle. You spoke about your government's commitment to the rule of law. And in fact, EFCC chairman just confirmed that about 50 convictions have taken place at lower levels of individuals charged with anti-corruption. However, none of the convictions have taken place at the higher level, the former governors, except for former governor of Edo State, who, as we all know, got off very lightly with a fine. So what is your government doing to ensure that the rule of law is applied equally throughout? Thank you so much.
Yeah, over here.
Good morning. My name is Femi Akibi. I'm with African Development Center. I have a follow-up question for the minister from the last visit. The comment the minister gave at the CSIS, simply the issue of money transfer from the the Africans in this hemisphere sending money to Nigeria. The minister mentioned that funds were being used by our citizens to become alcoholic, and that some of them use it to marry second wife. We are badly disturbed by that comment, and we would like to have some clarity. The second quick question I have is the issue of infrastructure. From an African development point of view, we think a continent without proper integrated continental infrastructure is a continent that will cease to assist industrially. And lastly, the issue of Sudan and the endowment of ICC. I'd like to have your comment. Thank you.
See if I can get somebody farther. Okay, I guess we're right up here.
Mr. Minister, I'm Dan Martin from Conservation International. The personal question that's not too serious is how do I stop all of the emails I'm getting from Nigeria? But I think that's a common problem. My serious question is, you mentioned the challenge to your government of the problems in the Niger Delta, and I wonder if you could just say a little bit about what measures the government is taking and how you anticipate resolving those issues.
Okay, I guess we'll go with those three for now.
All right, thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Concerning what we are doing to implement the laudable landmarks in the electoral reform package, of course, again, following due process, following rule of law, when we receive this thing from the panel that was set up to deal with it, set up by government, the Federal Executive Council discussed extensively, and a white paper is been issued on it. The next thing now is to take it to the National Council of States. The National Council of States consists of all the governors of the 36 states of the Federation, and not all of them are PDP governors, as I already indicated, and also all the former heads of states of Nigeria. The Chief Justice, of course, is also a member of the National Council of States, and many other eminent Nigerian traditional rulers. In that kind of place, you can't teleguide anybody. These are strong people, a lot of them with a lot of clout, and they are quite independent-minded people. So whatever we decided in the Federal Executive Council, the National Council of State has a right to accept or reject, and so on. After that, now, what comes out of the Council of State will now go to the National Assembly, because if you have all these things, you don't amend the law. You don't amend the existing Electoral Act. then it will just be a statement of good intentions. Nothing will happen. And it's not enough to amend the Electoral Act. They also need to amend the Constitution, because if you just amend the Electoral Act, you don't amend the Constitution. Then, of course, like in every other jurisprudence, any conflict between the legislation and the Constitution will prevail. So a lot of work needs to be done. Do we have the capacity to do all that? We believe that the overwhelming majority we have in the National Assembly, and the fact that PDP wants to be remembered in history as the party that not only won elections but deepened democracy in Nigeria. We are determined to use our majority in the National Assembly to ensure that the amendments that need to be made, even on those areas that some party members, for some narrow reasons, may not be comfortable, that those amendments are true. We are confident about that. About Professor Iwu, well, right now, by the laws of the country, he is the chairman of INEC. Again, we try to avoid a lynching mindset here, which lynching mindset seems to be often what we are being invited to identify with. Their opinions are divided about Iwu's handling of INEC. Just recently, many senators came and it was almost as if they were going to canonize him as the next best thing after perhaps some other sense of history. Of course, that raised some uproar. But they have in a democracy, people have a right to that point of view. So the other people who think that Iwu is a monster that came in human form. Again, that's democracy. They have their right point of view. But in the conflict of all these points of view, the right thing here is to follow the law. So when the time for the issue of who becomes chairman of INEC comes up, government will do what needs to be done. Government will do the right thing. And in doing what government ought to do, government will follow not only the law, but government will also reflect, as a democratic government, will also be sensitive to public opinion. And, of course, these kind of changes that are being contemplated are quite considerable. That without, even though I'm a senior member of government, I cannot preempt government decision on this matter. If government feels that those changes are of such enormity that even if you technically can be reappointed, that it may be better to have a new kid on the block, government will not hesitate to do precisely that. But I think it's better to cross that bridge when we get there. Yes, EFCC convictions. Again, this is a troubling area. It's a troubling area because I've had extensive discussion with the chairperson of EFCC, a wonderful lady who, in my opinion, is committed in this fight. But she's also an unlucky lady. She's unlucky because she's not even being given a chance to prove herself. She's unlucky because of the controversies that arose when the changes in EFCC took place have continued to be so loud that whatever capacity she has to demonstrate the robustness I know she possesses, that capacity is still being impaired by insinuations and doubts and skepticism. And what I know is that, I'll just give you an example, and here I'm speaking as a lawyer. If a governor, for all intents and purposes, a former governor is arrested for corruption, and precisely because he has a lot of money, he's able to hire some of the most expensive lawyers in the country, lawyers with a lot of clout and a lot of knowledge. And these lawyers are able to exploit the rules of court, which are similar to the rules of court here in the United States. Get bail for their client, ask for an adjournment to prepare their cases, and so on and so forth. And all kinds of dilatory tactics are used. Well, just like democracy can be untidy in many ways, and as Mr. Churchill said, is the worst form of government except there is no alternative. The same thing applies to the issue of if you are going to try people in accordance with existing laws, no matter the frustration you may feel about the slow pace of litigation, the slow pace of the trial, you should be concerned that the process is as important as the product. And so you go through all that untidiness. So, yes, I agree with you in one breath. The convictions are not coming as quickly as one would like to see it. And when I say one, I don't just mean the lynching crowd out there screaming for blue murder, including some of those people who are collecting money from these corrupt governors, and now want to see them in jail. But even a lot of these same people are saying the demonstration effect on the issue of fighting corruption is something that the system needs. So far, that demonstration effect is still taking place in terms of high-level arrests. Not too long ago, a governor in a PDP state who is a very influential member of the party was arrested by this same EFCC that is accused of not doing a good job. Does that make him guilty? Of course, it doesn't make him guilty. He still has to undergo trial. So we still want to see what is there in our legal procedures that make this kind of thing possible. As I say, I'll just put that similar to yours. Speaking as a lawyer, I think that my colleagues in the Nigerian bar really have to sit down and find how they themselves can be change agents. You see, the tragedy of Nigeria is that too much is being left for government. Too much is expected of government. And other key players in the system like lawyers and doctors and religious leaders are not themselves rising up to the challenges that they can also be part of the revolution that we all are interested. Why can't lawyers in Nigeria say, look, it doesn't matter how much money these people pay us, we are not going to go to court to simply drag the trials. Let's get to the root of this matter. So that's it. But as for the convictions, yes, they are slow in coming, but definitely they are coming. The other aspect that many people don't seem to realize is that the naming and shaming dimension of this thing is succeeding. At least the issue of corruption and who gets arrested is quite on the front burner, and people are now saying, look, even if you are just arrested and your children, even if you get free, your children will say, but daddy, how could I arrest you? I thought you were an honest man. That in itself is a new thing which is really having its own effect. Femi, you didn't get me right as to what I said. That's always the risk we run, public officials, when we try to level up and make incisive comments. I never said that the money that you guys are sending from America to Nigeria are turning the recipients into alcoholics. And I said there's need for a more structured way of sending that kind of money. There's need to ensure that the money actually is helping in the productive capacity of the people we are sending it to and in the communities. And I think it's fair to assume that some of that money you are sending is not achieving the purposes you want the money to achieve. We all come from some village somewhere, and we know that there are a lot of able-bodied people who just choose not to work. So as you send the money, and I still stand by my comment, which I think you're taking out of context, I still stand by my comment, as you send money to your cousins at home, assist them to get into productive labor. Don't just send the money in a blind way. Tell them, look, you work hard yourselves in America. When you send that money, you deny yourselves a lot of things because you pay your taxes here and you're on mortgage in many cases. You have credit cards that can be a bit extended. So when you send that money to your cousin, assist him to get into some work. It could just be to make mats. It could just be to have a bakery. It could just be to... But when you don't do that, the temptation will be very strong for the people you are sending the money to marry a third or fourth wife, or indeed to go into drinking. And I think that's a fair comment. It's a question of rising to a higher level of responsibility on the part of all, both those who are receiving money and those who are sending the money. But definitely there are a lot of honest, good people in Nigeria who are using the money as sending to them in positive way. Now, Sudan, ICC, well, okay, here again, our position is remain that of the African Union, which is that it should be possible to combine the quest for justice in Sudan to confront impunity, the tragedies of rape and burning of villages is a scandal. It's an open sore on the conscience of Africa, and no African government I know of is comfortable with that, and we have confronted the Sudanese government many times over these issues. And that was why when the ICC indictment thing came up, we didn't give them a blank check. We didn't go into some knee-jerk dance of solidarity in the African Union to say this is an African president, nobody can touch him. He said, I chaired that meeting, the Peace and Security Council meeting of African Union. What we asked United Nations Security Council was the provisions in the Treaty of Rome that allow for a deferment for 1 year, that those provisions should be put in place in order to see whether al-Bashir within that 1 year can be of good behavior and do more in the area of conflict resolution. We never had an outright rejection of that. And without holding brief for al-Bashir, within that period, a lot has happened in the area of conflict resolution. Not enough, but a lot has happened. And our position, remember, we have the highest number of troops there, so we have quite some exposure. Our position is that the cause for peace, the quest for peace in Darfur is not inconsistent with the quest for justice. Punish the wrongdoers, confront impunity, but also make sure that the traction for peace does not get unhinged because of the quest for justice. And when I went to Doha, Qatar, the Qatar initiative again was advancing this process. You know, the last peace agreement that was signed on Darfur was the Abuja peace agreement. Since then, nothing else has happened. The next thing that was beginning to look probable was the Qatari initiative, which we are supporting, Nigeria is supporting. Then this indictment just comes in. Now, we are moving on beyond the indictment, and when the Sudanese envoy came to Nigeria from President of Sudan, we told him clearly, don't get distracted by this warrant of arrest. Continue to confront impunity and continue to move in the area of conflict resolution. We are even going beyond that to condemn anything that could worsen the humanitarian crisis. And we think that it should be possible that whatever President al-Bashir may think is the national security challenges he faces in Sudan, that he can reconcile that with the need to have humanitarian agencies to continue to do the good work many of them are doing. A blanket expulsion of humanitarian agencies out of Sudan does not help the Sudanese people that President al-Bashir wants us to believe he's interested in their welfare. And we think that we can use our influence with him to urge him along that direction. That's on that. Finally, in terms of the question that we asked, how to solve the emails from Nigeria. It is not a light question. It's not a, I take that question quite serious. We all are embarrassed by it. Ignore those emails. And if you are not greedy, and I know you are not greedy, if you are not greedy as some people in America who believe that because Nigeria is some third world country, and so because it's a third world country, maybe it's even worse than a banana republic, a person can give away billions of naira in the name of being governor of the central bank, something you know can't happen here in America. But when you get such a letter from Nigeria saying that all you need to do is part with $35,000, and somebody who proposed to be governor of the central bank will make you as rich as Madoff, and I know why I'm using the name Madoff, and then you fall for that. You fall for that. You part with $35,000 in order to get $35 million from Nigeria. You are as culpable, you are as guilty as the advance fee scammer. In fact, left with me, you are even more culpable because you know better and you operate in systems that are very, very disciplined. So why do you think you can make the kind of money you have not worked for? This is called comfort. I mean, this does not justify the advance fee scam, but it's something in it's part of the products of globalization. The emails you are getting is part of the unwanted side effects of globalization. Join us to fight it by ensuring that the greed that makes that industry thrive that greed is confronted at its root. Then finally, Niger Delta, is our number one foreign policy challenge, and indeed is the number one challenge for this government, because unless we resolve it, every other thing else will be difficult to move forward. And we are making progress there because the violence is going down. There's considerable evidence of even the militants themselves actually to come out of the creeks once certain political framework are defined, some kind of amnesty and so on and so forth. And because if you attack and get into oil theft and have all that money, and you're staying in the creeks, and what is keeping you company are the crocodiles and the mosquitoes, you cannot go to a nice nightclub in Port Harcourt and have a glass of beer. Or what use is that money to you? So many of them are finding that it is not the right way to go. So there's a huge window of opportunity now available for a peaceful resolution of the Niger Delta crisis. And the government, of course, is having very ambitious plans for massive injection of funds into the place. The Ministry of Niger Delta has been created that to warehouse all the development initiatives to put them on fast track. But we're also hoping that the people of Niger Delta will hold their own leaders accountable to higher levels of good governance to ensure that the money that is put there for the development of that area does not end up in Cayman Islands. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And on that note, we want to thank once again Foreign Minister Ojo Madwekwe for a very wide-ranging and thoughtful set of comments. When I commented earlier that we often talk far into the night, it was not my intention to do that today. So we'll let everybody move on to your next meeting, but we will thank you once again and express our hope that Nigeria-U.S. relations continue on a more robust and indeed a very constructive tenor.
Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it.